good and big event. Carla?
I'm waiting for you to help.
Yeah. No, I know. Okay, we have to speak to me.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's announcement. My name is Carla Qualtrough, and I'm the Member of Parliament for Delta and the Federal Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional, unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nations. I'd also like to welcome the Prime Minister back to BC. And of course, welcome Premier Horgan and every member of your cabinet. Welcome my colleague, Mr. Minister Justin, all the way from Ontario. There are a number of dignitaries here today because this is such an important announcement. We have the Mayor of Coquitlam, we have MPs, MLAs, and provincial ministers. Welcome everybody. I'll also begin by acknowledging that this has been a tough year and a half for Canadians. In fact, for people around the world. People are mourning lost loved ones due to COVID. Our hearts are heavy as we learn about more and more children who've been lost in the residential school crisis. And we've lost British Columbians in the past 2 weeks due to the heat wave and, of course, the fires. It's also been a tough year for women. In fact, women have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 situation. And in fact, women have left the labor force because they've either lost jobs or they've had to take care of their children. Women have been on the front lines of this pandemic, but they've also been sidelined by this pandemic. Labor force participation rates by women are at their lowest in decades, and that's why today's announcement is so important. So without any further ado, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Minister Hussain, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development for the Government of Canada.
Thank you so much, Carla. Good morning, everyone. Bon matin, le monde, tout le monde. Thank you for the warm welcome. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour cette annonce historique. Thank you all for being here for today's historic announcement and an occasion to remember. I have to say today really comes full circle for me. I remember, Prime Minister, when we had a conversation about your vision for early learning and childcare. And at the time it was simply an idea. And today we have reached a point where we can make this idea a reality. Thank you. And we said then in our conversation that if we are able to make this idea a reality, that this would be, for me, the most single important thing and contribution that I would ever make and that we would both make to Canadians. Being able to stand here today alongside you and Premier Horgan and my provincial and federal counterparts and friends has made me think about that first day when we had that conversation. Et la raison pour cela est claire. And there's a reason for that. L'apprentissage et les services de garde de jeunes enfants ne sont pas un luxe, mais une nécessité. One thing we all know is that childcare is not a luxury for families. It is simply a necessity. Like all parents, I want to give my 3 young boys the best possible start in life, the best possible chance of success. And we know that every parent wants to do the same thing. But not every parent has that opportunity to give their kids the best possible chance in life, especially right now. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but even before the pandemic, a lot of parents have been forced to make the difficult choice of either going to work hard for their kids and provide for their children, or staying at home to take care of them. And let me tell you, that is simply not a choice. Not to mention that the childcare sector itself was struggling and has been particularly hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. Limited spaces, long wait lists, high costs, inaccessibility and care that did not meet the needs of Indigenous children and children of all abilities were all obstacles for Canadian families to navigate. Et depuis notre arrivée au gouvernement, nous savions que nous devions en faire plus. And when we came into office, we knew that we had to step up, that we had to do better for Canadian families. Since 2017, our government has invested over $207.4 million in early learning and childcare through bilateral agreements with the province of British Columbia. Nous avons fait de grands progrès depuis, mais nous savions qu'il y avait encore du travail à faire. We've made big strides since then, but we knew that there was a lot more work to be done. Parents are already feeling the anxiety of keeping their children safe, healthy, and supported. And let me be clear, we need a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, and we need it now. That is why we've committed to making historic investments in early learning and childcare that would see us reaching $10 a day in childcare fees on average in 5 years, and cutting fees for parents and families by half by the end of next year. And we came in with 4 goals: saving families thousands of dollars every year, creating more affordable childcare spaces across the country, ensuring that those childcare spaces were delivering high quality early learning and childcare, and that we do so through a well-supported, well-trained and highly motivated workforce, and providing early learning and childcare opportunities that are inclusive and culturally appropriate and relevant. Notre plan est ambitieux, mais pas impossible. Our plan is big and ambitious, but it's doable. Our children grow up fast right in front of our eyes, and we need to act now to ensure that high-quality childcare is affordable, inclusive, safe, accessible, and high quality. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, our vision for a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system is a reflection of the kind of Canada that we want. I have full confidence in us. We will get it done together, and today is a historic step in the right direction. And let me tell you, I'm going to turn it over next to the strongest advocate, visionary, and ally of Canadian parents. Someone who worked tirelessly to make sure that we arrived at this day, and that this day would become a reality. On that note, I want to welcome my friend, colleague, and Prime Minister. Over to you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Ahmed. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. First, I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. We thank the Coquitlam who continue to live on these lands and care for them, along with the waters and all that is above and below. I am very happy to be here at Lafarge Lake Park in Coquitlam with Premier Horgan. John, it's always great to see you, but really great to see you today. Today's announcement is yet another great example of how closely and collaboratively we've been able to work, particularly with this strong progressive government in BC, on things that'll make a real difference for people. With a shared vision on childcare, strong commitments that John has made over the past many years and actions he's taken, we've been able to move very quickly. I'm also happy to be joined by Ministers Hussein and Qualtrough. Ahmed, the work that you have done over the past many years, first signing bilateral agreements with all provinces and territories a number of years ago that have brought us forward on improving childcare right across the country for so many people. Minister Qualtrough, by members of our outstanding team here in BC, and by the Provincial Minister of State for Childcare, Katrina Chen, who's been an extraordinary ally on this as well. But I have to tell you, it's so great to be back in BC. This has been home for me for so many years in so many different ways. I've got deep roots here with my grandparents, my mom. I actually got my start as a teacher at Pitt River Middle School, just a few blocks that way. So coming full circle back here, back home today, is really, really exciting, particularly with the announcement we're able to make today, where yet again we see British Columbians leading the way for the entire country on progressive, strong values that bring people together. It is so great to be here. But I know I'm also here at a time that has been incredibly difficult for a lot of British Columbians. To begin with, the situation with the wildfires after last week's heat wave is extremely concerning, and we've been following it closely. This morning, I gathered a number of ministers for a meeting with our incident response group, because our priority is to keep working with partners like the province and municipal and Indigenous leaders to keep British Columbians safe. Later today, when John and I sit down together, we'll be talking about this. I'll also be meeting with the leadership, First Nations leadership, the municipal leadership, and other partners to emphasize that the federal government is here to help. Help in rebuilding, help in supports for families who've lost so much, families who are grieving, to be there with our provincial friends and partners, to be there with Canadians across the country who want to be helpful, who want to support families who are going through incredibly difficult times, even as we redouble our efforts and our commitments, taking accelerated action on fighting climate change and continue to building a green economy. Across the province, there are also people grieving after the recent discoveries of unmarked graves near former residential schools. To all survivors, families, and Indigenous people, we're here for you. We will continue to work with you on whatever you need to heal. Canada needs to recognize that the shame of our past is echoed today in continuing injustices, intolerance, and unfairness towards Indigenous peoples. And that reconciliation is not just about Indigenous peoples and governments, although that's an important part of it that we are all working hard on. It is also something that involves every single Canadian. Every single one of us must be on this path towards reconciliation, towards a better country in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Ces découvertes nous rappellent à quel point il est important de continuer à bâtir un meilleur avenir pour tout le monde. Et c'est pour ça qu'on est ici, pour annoncer des vraies mesures progressistes qui vont avoir un impact réel dans la vie des gens de Colombie-Britannique. The pandemic has laid bare what women and feminists have long known, that without good childcare, it's practically impossible for parents, especially mothers, to build a career. For middle-class families, quality childcare can be incredibly expensive, and that's if parents are able to find childcare spaces at all. Just take here in the Lower Mainland, where childcare can cost up to $60 a day. That's $300 a week for one child. What if you have 2 or 3 children? Hardworking families deserve better, but our economy deserves better as well. Rebâtir en mieux, c'est de s'assurer que les mères et les familles puissent avoir accès à un service de garde de qualité et abordable. C'est important pour nos enfants et c'est important pour notre économie de permettre à plus de femmes d'être sur le marché du travail. Quand on parle d'une relance féministe après cette pandémie, c'est de ça dont il est question. Des actions concrètes qui vont donner une chance à tout le monde de réussir. So yes, this is exactly what a feminist recovery looks like. In April, we announced our plan to build the first ever Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. And today I can share that we've reached an agreement with the strong, progressive allies in the government of BC to make childcare more affordable for families in this province. For people with young kids, this is huge. As part of the agreement, in the next 5 years, we'll work with the provincial government to achieve an average of $10 a day childcare for all regulated spaces for kids under 6. Also in the next 5 years, 30,000 new high-quality spaces will be created in British Columbia. This is real change you can count on. By the end of next year, the average childcare fees for BC parents will be cut in half, and there will be more than 12,000 $10 a day spaces available. To make all of this happen, we've worked incredibly hard with leaders within the government of British Columbia, which will fund critical services, grow a strong and skilled workforce of early childhood educators, and expand not-for-profit and public delivery of early learning and childcare. So if you're a parent, this landmark agreement led by the government of British Columbia and the federal government means that help is on the way. We're making your life easier and more affordable, and we're making sure kids get the best possible start in life. And I want to add to all of those parents and families watching us across the country right now, wondering when they're going to have the opportunities that the work that British Columbia and the federal government have done together is going to deliver for families in BC. We're working on it. We're right now excitedly working very closely with a number of jurisdictions across this country to follow BC's tremendous progressive lead on delivering real support for families and real support for our communities as we build back better from this pandemic. Bien sûr, un bon système de garde des jeunes enfants est un système qui est inclusif. Dans le cadre de cette entente avec le gouvernement de la Colombie-Britannique, nos deux gouvernements s'engagent à offrir plus de soutien pour les enfants avec des besoins particuliers. On va aussi faire en sorte que les membres de différentes communautés vulnérables aient un accès équitable à des places en service de garde. Et on va travailler avec nos partenaires autochtones pour s'assurer que les enfants puissent avoir des places avec des programmes qui tiennent compte de leur culture. This is a permanent partnership with minimum ongoing annual funding of $9.2 billion right across the country. That's how you create a system, by working hand in hand with willing partners like the government of BC to fund the services families depend on. We're building a better future for families. As we do, we're building a better economy, too. Our Canada-wide child care plan will help thousands of people, including women, be able to choose to build both a family and a career. This is real, tangible progress. This is what it means to be a feminist government. Our early learning and child care plan builds on investments we've already made in a more progressive parental leave system. Our plan also builds on the success of the Canada Child Benefit, which is increasing again this year and has already lifted hundreds of thousands of children right across the country out of poverty. But before I end today, I want to once again thank my friend, Premier Horgan, for his leadership and vision on this file. John, as you well know, this is a game-changing policy for families. BC has made unbelievably important progress on childcare since launching your own plan 3 years ago, and this foundation will allow us to move together quickly and boldly in the coming months and years. And of course, all of this work wouldn't be possible without the advocacy of the childcare sector. That's why it's so important that you continue to have a seat at the table. So to all the experts, advocates, educators and providers who were so integral in encouraging not just governments, but Canadians in continuing to demand better childcare opportunities for families, for communities and for our future, thank you. We are here to support your valuable work, and together we will all continue building a future where everyone has a real and fair chance at success. Merci beaucoup, mes chers amis.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. I'll now invite Premier Horgan to say a few words.
Thank you, Minister Qualtrough, Minister Hassan, Prime Minister, welcome home. I too want to acknowledge that we are all gathered today on the unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, and I want to lift my hands to all of you who've come here today to hear about an exciting change in how we do business here in Canada. I also want to acknowledge, of course, my colleague Katrina Chen, the Minister of State for Childcare, Minister Mitzi Dean, the Minister responsible for Children and Family Development. And I also want to say to Selena Robinson, to Mayor Stewart, to Finn Donnelly, and I see Councillor Hodge out in the crowd. I wasn't being provocative wearing my shamrock mask to Adirondack country. It's just a habit. I can't help myself. But it is great to be in Coquitlam today to announce and share in the joy that I know childcare providers who have been relentlessly promoting the $10 a day plan and the advocates right across the country, but particularly here in British Columbia. We started in 2017 with a plan to deliver $10 a day childcare with our Childcare BC plan, $2 billion invested since then, but we could not get to where we're going to get in the next 22 months without the full participation of the federal government. And although I want to acknowledge the absolute tragedies that we've experienced through the past 16 months of COVID-19, out of crisis, out of challenge also comes opportunity and potential. And over that period of time, the Prime Minister has convened over 30 First Ministers meetings to discuss the challenges that British Columbians and Canadians have been facing throughout the pandemic. And it's not just, of course, the pandemic. We had lockdowns, we had uncertainty, we had our loved ones in long-term care facilities unable to reach out to their families in their last days. These are profound issues that affected all of us. And by coming together over 30 times, governments across the country, different political stripes, all coming together not to air our grievances, but to listen to each other about how we could put in place programs that would help Canadians. We talked about childcare during the pandemic. The childcare workforce was the workforce behind the workforce. One of the first things we discovered as COVID-19 took hold in Canada was if we did not have childcare spaces open and available, our communities would not function. And that elevated yet again the importance of making sure we had an affordable, accessible plan for all British Columbians, indeed all Canadians. We talked about this meeting after meeting after meeting, and I am so grateful that the Prime Minister and his team not only heard what we were saying here in British Columbia and in other parts of the country, but they said, we want to get into the game with you, we want to do this together, and that is why we're here today. 3 years ago, childcare in British Columbia could only be described as patchwork. I can't tell you the number of families that told me about, and I'm sure some of them may well be here today, about the big calendar on their refrigerator that had where the kids were going to be on a certain day. If the mother-in-law wasn't available because she had an appointment, what am I going to do? These questions were coming up every day, every week, every month for years as young families tried to get a way forward to make sure their children were cared for, they were getting the early education they would need to be prepared for K-12 and the challenges of a competitive world. And yet, despite the challenges, there was not progress being made. So we said in 2017 that we were going to move to $10 a day because that's where the advocates have been championing, that's where providers wanted to go, and more importantly, that's where parents needed us to get to. We took tentative first steps. We had a coalition government at that time. We had to negotiate every step of the way. But I have to say, although I do not regret 12 miserable years in opposition, it is in opposition where you hear from people who have challenges, who have ideas and suggestions about how government can do a better job. And it's by listening. Government seems to think that this is, seem to think that governments do this instinctively. Oftentimes we do not. And again, I lift my hands to the Prime Minister for repeatedly bringing people together at tables across the country to talk about the challenges that families were facing. And today, we're here to reap the benefits of that. We no longer have patchwork systems here in British Columbia. We have seen a dramatic reduction in costs for families right across the board. And with a $3.2 billion investment from the federal government over the next 5 years, we can and will get to $10 a day in British Columbia, as we had predicted, as the advocates had hoped and had constantly pushed us to get to. Now we can achieve that. I think most Canadians expect and of course demand that governments work together, municipal, federal, provincial. But oftentimes it doesn't work that way. We have competing interests, and a country as diverse and vast as Canada, different issues emerge on different days that take the attention of elected representatives. But in this instance, with Katrina Chen's leadership on my team and with Selena now, the Minister of Finance, Carol James before that, I don't think it's lost on anyone that the federal finance minister today is also a woman, and when women get together, things get done, and that's why we're going to have $10 a day. I want to also pay a tribute to my friend Carol James, who retired to deal with health issues and move on with her life, but without her leadership in the first days of our time in government, we would not have got on the track that we're on today, and in fact now a fast track with the federal government as partners. And I can't tell you how important it is. In this instance, my government now has 29 women and 28 men. Again, not lost on me about how you get a feminist recovery when feminists are driving the government. I want to thank everyone who's involved today, all of the elected representatives, the staff, the relentless work that's been going on under the cloud of COVID-19, and now as we go into what will be perhaps another horrific fire season, will be the third in 5 years in my time, the worst in 2017 until 2018 became worse still. We're crossing our fingers and praying to whoever we pray to that 2021 starts to improve as the summer goes on. But it's through challenges and adversity that good things happen. Canadians are renowned around the world for acknowledging our failings, as we have with respect to residential schools, as we did with the internment of Japanese, as we did with turning away Jewish refugees in the Second World War, the Komagata Maru in the harbor in Vancouver. These are stains on our history, but if we learn from those and recognize that the diversity of this great country represented here today will drive us forward, when we acknowledge the past and we focus on a better future, that's what Canadians expect from us. That's what British Columbians certainly deserve. I want to thank you for coming today, and I cannot wait to cash the check, Prime Minister. Nice job.
Thank you, Premier Horgan. I'd now invite Minister of State for Childcare, Katrina Chen, to say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, ministers, Prime Minister, Premier, and all of our provincial and federal colleagues for gathering here today. And I also want to really give a big shout out to childcare advocates, early childhood educators who've worked so hard, along with families, to bring us to this agreement here today. I do want to begin by recognizing that we're gathering here on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Coquitlam First Nations, and always remember the importance of reconciliation through the work we do every single day. And I also want to begin by saying that I'm not just here as the Minister of State who has been so honored and thankful to do this work since 2017 to pull together a new social program for BC families, but I'm also a mother, a working parent, an immigrant without any family here in Canada who constantly and always struggled with childcare. Even today, I have to drag my 7-year-old son here to this event, who's pretending to be the photographer. And he is so excited to be here today because he was telling me, Mommy, all the important people from TV are going to be in person today. But the struggles of parents, I know I'm not alone in this struggle. Families across BC have been struggling to find affordable quality early learning and care services for years and years. And when I became the minister responsible for this program, I always remember thinking about how come the government have not come together, working together with communities to bring a new program and services that family desperately count on. So today is a really exciting and really historical moment to see your federal government, your provincial government, your representatives, and along with parents and families and advocates and early childhood educators working together. The federal investment is so critical. The significant investment will help us in BC to build on the foundation that we have already been building on since 2017 to bring inclusive, quality, affordable early learning care system for all BC families, to bring down the cost of childcare, to accelerate the creation of spaces, and also to support the workforce at the same time. This is a historical moment for us to come together and think about how we can work together to create an equitable, inclusive community for all. And this is not just a social program. This is a social program that will bring us gender equity, to support women historically who have been bearing the brunt and responsibilities of childcare, to be able to lift them up as we go through this economic recovery. And BC has already done a lot through the past few years. In short 3.5 years, we've been accelerating the creation of spaces, working with municipalities, including Coquitlam, to look at how can we work together with school district, Indigenous communities, local providers, even small family providers, to find the best way to create spaces. We have been bringing down the cost of childcare. Tens and thousands of families are already paying $10 a day for childcare, are already seeing a fee reduction in their childcare fees. And we have to continue to do more, and this federal investment will help us to get there, to make sure all families have affordable childcare. And we cannot build a new social program, a new system without early childhood educators, who are the workforce behind the workforce, as the Premier has said. That we need to make sure we support the work they do through wage enhancement, through bursary programs, through ongoing workforce support. And we have already rolled out over a dozen strategies to ensure that they get the support they deserve, including, thanks to the Finance Minister, doubling the wage enhancement starting in September this year. In 2 months, they will be getting $4 an hour wage enhancements through our provincial funding and along with the hard work of Minister Dean here. And we have to keep going. We cannot slow down. So last night, when I was reading our finalized agreement, it was pages and pages. I cannot tell you how I was thinking about families that I've met. Families like Kim, who is an early childhood educator who struggled with her own childcare, almost could not return to work as an early childhood educator, but because her child happened to get into a $10 a day prototype site, thanks to the federal government investment, that she was able to return to work as an early childhood educator when her children can receive affordable childcare. I was thinking about families like Zarif and his wife Zohra, who Zarif was a doctor from Afghanistan, immigrated to Canada, had a really tough beginning. I met them before I became an MLA. And out of the blue, I bumped into them at the Inclusive Childcare Center, where their youngest child was receiving extra support for his support needs, getting affordable care, paying nothing for their childcare fees, so his wife could go back to school, learn English, as Zarif worked hard to support a family of 5. And those are the stories that we need to continue to hear throughout the province. We need to make sure we're bringing this together for all families in BC, and we cannot do it alone. We need to work together with municipalities, with Indigenous communities, with families and providers across the province to make sure we can deliver the services that family count on and build this new social program together. And last, I just want to say, investing in childcare is so critical for our young children when their brain is developed the fastest before the age of 5, for their early years. It's so critical for our families when parents need to return to work, and it's so critical when employers are struggling, especially during this economic recovery process, to retain and recruit their workers. Investing in childcare is a necessity to create an inclusive, welcoming, and equitable society for all British Columbians, for all Canadians, and let's start to get to work and get the work done. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. You can definitely see that this announcement today is rooted in a shared understanding that childcare is an economic, a social, and an equity issue, and a shared belief that every single child in this country has a right to the best possible start in life. And it's because of the leadership within my own province of BC that we get to be the first one in the country to benefit from this collective and shared view of childcare. So thank you very much, Premier Horgan. Welcome again, Prime Minister, and I will hand it over for questions.
Thank you, everybody. As a reminder to everybody on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You will be limited to one question and one follow-up only. For media on site, we will ask that you please line up at the microphone at the front and provide your name and outlet before you ask your question. Our first question today is from Lisa Cordasco, Vancouver Sun.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to hear some more details about this agreement. How much is British Columbia putting into this new agreement, and how much is the federal government putting in, and how will that result in helping with the fee cap, which has kind of discouraged new spaces in some situations where people want to expand daycare spaces, but say that they can't do it with the fee cap.
Well, thank you for the question. And of course, the fee cap was put in place not to discourage the development and expansion of spaces, but in fact to make them more affordable for families. This was the fundamental challenge we faced when we came to government in 2017, and we have created more spaces in the past 3 years than were created in the 16 years before we arrived here. So the proof, in my opinion, is in the pudding. We've been able to get spaces developed. We can continue to do this now with a significant investment from the federal government. $2 billion pre the budget 2021, which was, of course, a COVID budget coming out of a global pandemic. Our commitment to meeting our $10 a day targets remains intact, and in fact now can be accelerated with the support from the federal government. But investments in childcare are fundamental, as Minister Chen said, to ensuring that families can realize their full potential and get back into the workforce. And it's not just, of course, advocates that talk about this and parents, it's the Business Council, it's the Chambers of Commerce, because they recognize, of course, because our society is made up of families, that if we're going to have full participation as we come out of the pandemic, we need everybody in place. That means training early childhood educators. That means lifting those wages up, as Katrina said, so that people will get into the profession, so we can recruit and retain the next generation of workers. We're also, in the next 24 months, transitioning childcare from the responsibility of the Minister of Children and Family Development into education, because at the end of the day, this is about early learning and childcare. That's the plan that we've developed, and that's the plan that we're going to proceed with the great support of the federal government, to the tune of the next number of years, $3.2 billion.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I'd like to ask the Prime Minister something. When can businesses who are involved in the tourism sector expect to see some solid metrics for the international border reopening that are very clear and reliable?
I think we all want to get back to as much normal as possible, and indeed make sure that that normal is better than it was before. But we're not quite through this pandemic yet. We still have to be careful. We still have to be vigilant. We have taken a significant step after having shut down the borders almost entirely for 1.5 years. We've now allowed for people who are fully vaccinated, who are Canadian travelers, permanent residents, people who have the right to travel during this pandemic, to come back without having to quarantine for 2 weeks. That is a big step, and it encourages everyone also to make sure that they're moving forward with vaccinations. Everyone's got to get vaccinated if we're going to get through this as a community, as a country. We are very eager to move forward on next steps, and I hear tourism industry very eager as well to start welcoming fully vaccinated tourists from around the world. And we're going to make sure that we are moving forward on that in the coming weeks. We have to make sure, however, every step of the way, that we are not sliding back, not having to reclose, not having to go yo-yoing again in our openings and closings. That's what we all want to avoid. So taking it methodically and responsibly is the way we're going to first and foremost continue to keep Canadians safe and ensure that our recovery happens as smoothly and as quickly as it possibly can, safely.
Next question is from Greg Rasmussen, CBC.
Prime Minister, this question is for you. Welcome to BC. You mentioned the $9.2 billion annual cost of this program, and of course, for the foreseeable future, that will be borrowed money on top of the record deficits we've seen over the last 1.5 years. How concerned are you about the overall growing pile of debt and the burden that will place on future generations?
That's a great question. It's an important one, and one that I've heard from many, many people. I think the first reflection we all have to have is, what would have happened if the federal government hadn't been there with 8 out of every $10 in COVID supports over the past 1.5 years? Families without CERB, businesses without the wage subsidy, without the small business loan program, without the rent supports, the significant supports that provinces like BC put forward to support people. This pandemic was a massive hit for our economy, for our communities, to our workers, to our families. But because of the choice we made as a federal government, it wasn't nearly as big as a hit as it would have been to so many people had we not stepped up. And at a time where families are borrowing at about 19% on their credit cards, the federal government borrow at next to zero interest rates. And that means we went into debt, yes, so that families wouldn't have to nearly as much, so small businesses wouldn't have to. And that wasn't done just in a defensive way. It was also done because we understood that the best way to make sure that our young people have the best possible jobs in the coming years, that our economy bounces back quicker and greener than ever before, is to make sure that the recovery happens really quickly. And that happens when you give people support so they can continue to pay their rent, so they don't lose their homes. So businesses don't have to completely shut down, but can basically power through and reopen as quickly as possible. Growth in our economy and the long-term benefits will come from the fact that we were able to support and invest in families. And if we hadn't, the recovery would have been slower, and there would have been even more of a debt burden on families. And don't just take my word for it. The IMF, international financial institutions, the OECD, all of them not only said you need to support people if you're going to get through it, but they actually point out that Canada was one of the best countries in terms of that, and is one of the best countries positioned for a strong recovery because of it. So I will let conservative politicians continue to say we spent too much on getting Canadians through this. I know that investing in Canadians and having confidence in Canadians' ability to rebuild this economy even better before is the right path, was the only path for us to take.
Greg, do you have a follow-up?
I do have a follow-up, Prime Minister. I'm going to shift gears a bit. It's an international question. It's about the situation in Haiti. Lots of concern there, obviously, and questions about the legitimacy of the interim government. How much confidence do you have? How much legitimacy is there in the Claude Joseph government?
Well, let us remember that Haiti has been facing political difficulty and duress over the past many years. There were questions about the legitimacy of the past government, and we obviously deeply regret and condemn the cowardly assassination of President Moïse. But Haiti has been a country long facing real challenges for which Canada has continued to be a friend, a partner, a humanitarian and development investor, and we will continue to be there for the Haitian people as we get through this time of instability as carefully and as solidly as possible. We will continue to be friends of the Haitian people.
Could you answer that in French as well, please?
Il faut souligner que ça fait des mois et même des années qu'il y a des questions sur la stabilité et la légitimité politique de la situation en Haïti. Et c'est pour ça que le Canada travaille de si proche avec nos amis et le peuple haïtien pour offrir et pour aider à trouver un peu plus de stabilité. Nous condamnons sans équivoque, sans réserve, l'horrible assassinat du président Moïse. Mais nous allons continuer d'être là pour appuyer le peuple haïtien dans ces moments difficiles. Nous allons être là pour aider la perle des Antilles à continuer à retrouver son lustre.
You are the best leader in the world.
Okay.
We're going to go back to the phone lines. The next question is from Glenn McGregor, CTV Ottawa.
No. I love
Thank you.
you.
Just to follow on the question about the border, we are now well into the summer tourism season, and yet the industry has no guidance on when they can start accepting visitors, vaccinated, unvaccinated, from other countries. And they are concerned that you were going to call an election before any kind of yardstick timeline is put in place. Will you commit to putting in a plan for a full border reopening before you visit the Governor General to dissolve Parliament?
As I've said, Glenn, my focus is on supporting Canadians and continuing to get through this pandemic and continuing to recover our economies. And yes, I know how difficult this past year and a half has been for our tourism sector, and that's why we have given unprecedented supports to businesses, small and large, that have been affected by the pandemic, which was not their fault. and they needed our support, and we were there for them. We will continue to do everything we can to reopen safely and rapidly. But you did mention, wondering when unvaccinated tourists can start coming to Canada. I can tell you right now, that's not going to happen for quite a while. We need to continue to ensure that the safety of Canadians, of all the sacrifices that so many people have made over the past many, many months, are not for nothing. That we recognize the work that has been done by extraordinary partnerships across orders of government, by community organizations and leaders, and by ordinary Canadians being there for each other, there for your neighbors, there for the elderly, there for your young people. These are the things that got us through this pandemic, and we are not going to jeopardize that by moving too quickly. We will move responsibly forward. We will continue the reopening of our borders, but we will do it in a way that ensures the ongoing safety of all Canadians.
Glenn, do you have a follow-up?
I do. A different topic. Prime Minister, you know the Trans Mountain Pipeline is still a very active issue in British Columbia, as you heard a few moments ago from some of the people who were there. And when your government bought the pipeline 3 years ago, your finance minister at the time said that it would be divested, it would be sold off within a matter of months or within a short period of time. That still hasn't happened. Are you still pursuing that plan, or is the Canadian people going to continue to own this pipeline indefinitely?
I think we need to understand how important it is that we move forward in fighting climate change and in transforming our economies in positive ways. And while we are transforming those economies, we continue to drive gas-powered cars. We continue to need oil and gas all around the world, but we need to move forward through and beyond it. We need to reduce our carbon emissions, and part of making sure that we have access to markets other than the United States for our oil and gas resources is about getting the best returns for our natural resources so we can invest them in the transition and the transformation of our economy. That is, quite frankly, why all the profits from the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion will be put into the green economy. That's also why we're moving forward on announcing, as we did just last week, that all new cars and trucks, light trucks, bought and sold in Canada in the coming year, in 2035, will be zero-emission vehicles. These are things that we know we need to do, but we are in a time of transition, and we need to get there responsibly and properly. We are not in the long-term business of operating pipelines as the Government of Canada. We will be moving forward with divestment, but we will do it in a responsible way as the project becomes de-risked.
Next question is from Mandy Wen, Fairchild.
Hi, Prime Minister. Last week, the wildfire just has destroyed 90% of the Lytton, and including the Lytton Chinese History Museum. So I'm wondering, will federal government and the BC government would work together to provide support to the local people there, and also review the museum and other infrastructure there?
I've had many conversations already with Premier Horgan about our partnership and our work together on rebuilding, on first dealing with supporting those families, that community that has been so devastated by the wildfire, and unfortunately very aware that this is going to be a difficult summer for many communities across the country with the forecasts involved. I will be sitting down a little later with the mayor of Lytton alongside a number of First Nations leaders to talk about how we can work together on keeping people safe right now, but also rebuilding the town in the coming months, and we will all be part of it. John, I know you want to say a few words on this.
Just with respect to the Chinese Canadian Museum, that's an initiative that we've been spearheading here in British Columbia. We have a plan to have a hub and spoke model, with the hub being here in Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, and Chinatown, as well as a hub in Victoria connected to the Royal BC Museum, which is, of course, a jewel for Canada. The Prime Minister and I are talking about that issue all the time. But one of the spokes was to be in Lytton. a critical place in the history of Chinese Canadians, fundamental to the development of British Columbia and Canada. So it's a great loss of archival material and other artifacts, but we're hopeful that we can recreate the Lytton spoke as we build out the Chinese Canadian Museum going forward. It's going to be an enormous challenge now. I had the opportunity to fly over Lytton earlier in the week, and the devastation is profound. I spoke with firefighters that were from Lytton. Their homes were gone. They had nowhere to go back to. They stayed on the line. They continued to work for the BC Wildfire Service. So the commitment and dedication of the people of Lytton is deeply moving, and our commitment and the commitment of the federal government and other partners, quite frankly, across the country, is to make sure that we can rebuild Lytton back better as a climate-focused community, a fire-safe community. The hottest place in Canada year after year after year, an unprecedented heat, and both the Prime Minister and I are acutely aware that this climate change phenomenon is not a one-time thing, although it was a once-in-a-thousand-year episode. We're going to see events like this more and more. That's why we're going to be both going to Glasgow in the fall to COP, to talk about the plans we have here in British Columbia through Clean BC and how we can continue to collaborate, keeping in mind that British Columbia is 5 million souls in a sea of 7 billion. Climate change requires international focus, not just British Columbia focus, not just Canada focus, but we stand together on this issue to make sure that the world understands. We're seeing it here year after year. We need to take immediate action, and that's our plan. I know that's the plan of the federal government as well.
Mandy, do you have a follow-up?
I have a follow-up question for Premier Horgan. BC Liberals today just said that if the government declare a provincial state of emergency, it will make a huge difference to help to fight the wildfire. So what's your comment on that?
Well, it would make no difference at all. We had been in a state of emergency in British Columbia for 16 months. We have all of the resources that we need to bring to bear, either through Emergency Management BC, through the BC Wildfire Service. There are local states of emergency as fires emerge. That is how we traditionally manage these issues. We don't need a state of emergency. The Prime Minister and I talked on Canada Day about how Canada could collaborate with us. Already assets have been moved into Edmonton so they can assist us with our efforts here in British Columbia. So the collaboration at the municipal level with Indigenous communities with the federal government is already well underway. There's no requirement for a state of emergency. Again, it's not something that I do by snapping my fingers. I take advice from professional officials, whether they be in emergency management or the wildfire service, and when they ask for it, we'll deliver it. If the official opposition asks for it, that's fine, but they're not the professionals that I'm depending on. I know British Columbians would prefer that I listen to the firefighters and the communities and bring those issues forward as they're needed, not just to make a headline.
Going back to the phone, we have Maria Weisgarber, CTV Vancouver.
Oh, hi there. Just a question for the Prime Minister relating to border travel. We're about 2 weeks away from when mutual travel restrictions with the U.S. are set to expire. I know you've said that you want to move forward responsibly, but you've also said it's based on our vaccination rate as well here in Canada. So is our rate on track to see the resumption of discretionary travel between our two countries following July 21st?
I can understand entirely why people are so eager to see the end of this pandemic and move forward. We are not there yet. We're getting much closer. We're seeing case counts drop right across the country. More importantly, we're seeing the vaccination rates lead the world right across the country. The government of BC has done an absolutely outstanding job in getting vaccines into arms. And we all know we're getting close to the end of this pandemic. But we're not there yet. And we're going to continue to work with the provinces. We'll continue the First Minister's meetings to talk about when and how we need to safely reopen. We're going to continue to work with the White House and with our American partners on coordinating as much as possible. But we will make sure that every step of the way, the safety of Canadians and the strength of our reopening is first and foremost.
Maria, do you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you. You also referenced unvaccinated visitors, that it will be a while before they'd be able to come to Canada. So what do you foresee being put in place to ensure that that happens?
First of all our conversations now are about what support we can give and what ease we can offer to vaccinated travelers. We know that if you continue to be not fully vaccinated, you still have to do a 2-week quarantine. There are still strict rules to prevent you from spreading COVID-19 or becoming ill yourself. Before we get to reflecting on what international travelers who are not fully vaccinated might be able to do, we're going to proceed in a step-by-step, and I can tell you that the next step will be looking at what measures we can allow for international travelers who are fully vaccinated. That will be our first focus. We will have more to say in the coming weeks, obviously.
Next question is from Brenna Owen, Canadian Press.
Hi, thank you. This question is coming from my colleagues in Ottawa, actually. The Taliban is now controlling parts of Kandahar where Canadian soldiers fought and died. Given the years Canada spent in the country, the lives lost and the money spent, what obligation does Canada have to Afghans and the Canadians who served in Afghanistan, and what would you say to those who feel it was a waste or we could have done more?
There are thousands of girls who are going to school and who went to school over the past years in Afghanistan because Canadians stepped up. Because we knew that we could and must make a difference in a very, very challenging part of the world. We achieved much in terms of establishing a path to peace and the ongoing work we need to continue to do as a world in Afghanistan is to support the proper path forward, to support democratic processes, to support women and girls' education. When I was at the NATO meeting a few weeks ago in Brussels, this was a significant topic of conversation, how the world was going to continue to support the pathway towards a better future in Afghanistan, to continue to build on the sacrifices and the investments we've made over the past decades in a way that didn't involve the strong military presence that we've had. It is something we continue to be committed to.
Do you have a follow-up, Brenna?
I do, yes. So I believe that you met with the wildfire incident response group this morning. I know more meetings are planned for today, but I wonder what you can tell us about the immediate plan to prevent what happened in Lytton from happening elsewhere in Canada in years to come this summer, and does Canada need a better national wildfire strategy?
These are all questions that we are dealing with, of course, things that we've been talking about over the past years, since the very difficult years that we faced a few years ago, and because the fact of extreme weather events being more common because of climate change, we need to be thinking about stronger processes to put in place and better things to respond to. But right now we're still very much in the support for grieving families, for people who've lost so much. That's what our engagement is, even as we look to put in place measures that are going to minimize and reduce the risks of future wildfires having the same devastating impact that this one did. John, I know you want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, thanks, Prime Minister. Obviously, fighting wildfires in British Columbia is something we've been doing for a long, long time. We're good at it, but the intensity and the frequency of fires has been unprecedented in the past 5 years. This speaks to me and to the government of British Columbia as a critical time to pivot, to find new and innovative ways to do the work that we do. There is a command center in Winnipeg that services the whole country when we move and redeploy resources. We have currently in British Columbia firefighters from Quebec, firefighters from New Brunswick, but that's because the fire seasons have not yet started in those communities. We have north-south relationships with California, Washington, Oregon, and developing relationships, of course, with Yukon and with Alaska. But as a West Coast, where we have seen in California just horrific seasons year after year after year, we need to find better ways to prepare. That means taking fuel out of the forest. That means not just deploying our resources when the fires start, but when the fires stop, deploying more resources to make sure we're removing fuel. And that's where the Prime Minister and I are going to be talking about how can we use the Canadian military with all of the great work they do internationally and here at home. How can we start to train and The Defence Minister Sajjan of British Columbia and understands full well these challenges, and we're hopeful that we can find new ways to redeploy military resources, the Armed Forces of Canada, to help with fuel management, because if there's no fuel, it's easier to manage the fires. And again, of course, we have to build differently. The building codes have to change. These are national and provincial challenges. But I've discovered over the past 4 years that I've had the privilege of being Premier of British Columbia that we can get a whole lot done when we work together. Let's put the grievances to one side and find those things that bring us together, like childcare, like climate action, like making sure that we're protecting our coast, something that I'm passionate about, and I know the Prime Minister. Salmon, again, a federal jurisdiction, but don't tell the salmon that. All they know is they leave the river and then they come back. And we need to make sure that we're working together over these administrative lines that have been developing since 1867. Thank goodness they did, but now in 2021, we need to find ways to bring to bear resources where we need them, when we need them, and we've been able to do that through the pandemic. I'm hopeful we can continue doing that into the future.
We have time for one more question today, and that comes from Nantu Sumaru, CBC Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour Monsieur Trudeau. La question serait de savoir est-ce que le fédéral va aider à la reconstruction du village de Lytton et aussi pourquoi avoir attendu avant d'envoyer de l'aide alors qu'on connaît déjà les scénarios des feux de forêt.
Nous sommes là pour aider ces familles, cette communauté qui a été dévastée par les feux à Lytton. J'ai eu une rencontre cet après-midi avec des leaders communautaires et de Premières Nations pour pouvoir parler de plus ce qu'on peut faire, mais ça se fait ensemble, ça se fait avec la province, ça se fait en partenariat. On est là pour aider, mais je peux souligner que la province de la Colombie-Britannique a énormément d'expertise dans la lutte contre les feux de forêt et le gouvernement fédéral est là pour ajouter des effectifs s'il y en a de besoin, quand il y en a de besoin. Mais je peux vous assurer que la province est en train de gérer ça sans avoir besoin de plus de notre aide pour l'instant. Mais on est là si jamais il y en a besoin de plus.
That's all the time we have. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you all.